A brutal snowstorm swept through Aspen Creek that night, turning the forest into a white abyss. 3 police officers never made it back from patrol, their car found wrecked, their radios silent. Everyone thought they were gone. But miles away, in a lonely cabin buried beneath the snow, a woman and her little girl were about to hear something that would change everything, the desperate barking of a wounded German shepherd guiding fate to their door. They had no idea that this dog would not only save 3 men's lives, but also heal hearts long frozen by grief. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your support helps us share more stories of faith, love, and second chances. The night had fallen hard over Aspen Creek, Colorado, a mountain town swallowed by snow and silence. The blizzard came from the north, thick as smoke, and merciless as the cold that clawed through even the strongest walls. Pines groaned under the weight of ice, and the mountain road twisted like a dark ribbon buried beneath a sea of white. Visibility was near zero, the wind carrying a faint metallic howl that made even the air sound haunted. On that road, a patrol truck skidded sideways, its headlights cutting crooked beams through the storm. Inside, the 3 police officers of the Aspen Creek PD, Sergeant Luke Donovan, Officer Ryan Hale, and rookie Cody Lane, were barely conscious. Luke Donovan, 42, was a man carved from discipline and loss. Tall, broad-shouldered, with short brown hair already touched by gray, he had the kind of face that bore silence like armor. Once a family man, he had buried his wife 3 winters ago after she died in a hiking accident in these same mountains. Since then, Luke had become quieter, colder perhaps, yet never cruel. Duty was the only thing that still anchored him to the world. Even now, smoke curling from his lips, his instincts refused to die. His wrists burned from the thick ropes binding them. His breath came in short bursts as he tried to orient himself in the chaos. Beside him, Ryan Hale, 35, ex-Marine turned narcotics officer, was the kind of man who lived in constant motion. His tanned skin was drawn tight across a square jaw marked with a small scar on his right cheek, a souvenir from Afghanistan. He had humor once, the kind that eased tension in a room, but the military had stripped that down to grit. Now he was all instinct and muscle memory. His dark eyes snapped open, scanning the cabin like a soldier in a foxhole. Across from them slumped Cody Lane, the youngest, just 26, with blond hair matted to his forehead and fear trembling behind his pale blue eyes. He was new, idealistic, the kind of cop who still believed every good deed mattered. He had joined the force only 6 months earlier, full of bright promises and sleepless nights. Now, tied and gagged, the snowstorm outside roared louder than his heartbeat. The truck's dashboard flickered orange. Gasoline dripped from a punctured tank, sizzling against the snow. Somewhere in the dark, a spark hissed. Luke tried to twist his wrists, felt the rope bite deeper into his skin. "Ryan!" He rasped through the tape muffling his mouth, the sound lost in the blizzard. Ryan grunted back, pulling his arms until the rope fibers groaned. The smell of burning rubber reached them before the flames did. Then it happened. The fire crawled up the seat fabric like a living thing. Within seconds, smoke filled the cabin, stinging their eyes. Cody began thrashing, his muffled cries of panic rising over the crackle of fire. Luke turned his head, saw the boy's face wet with tears and sweat, and something deep in him. The same part that once whispered bedtime stories to his daughter snapped him back to command mode. He kicked hard at the truck bed, the sound barely carried through the storm, and then, as if conjured from the snow itself, a shape appeared. Out of the blinding white came a German shepherd, large and lean, fur black and tan, but now streaked with frost. One ear was bent slightly, the other sharp and alert. His right front leg dragged slightly through the snow, leaving a trail of red, blood against white. His name was Shadow, 7 years old. once a K-9 unit for another precinct, presumed dead after a building collapsed during a raid 2 winters ago. The dog had survived, alone, wild, yet still carrying the ghost of his training. Shadow approached the burning truck with cautious intensity, the wind whipping around his body. The heat stung his face, but he pressed forward. His breath came in sharp clouds. He could smell smoke, oil, and the faint but unmistakable scent of men, the kind who had once worked beside him. Inside, Luke turned his head and saw 2 eyes gleaming through the window. Not human, not imagined. The dog climbed onto the tailgate, paws slipping on ice, and pressed his muzzle against the ropes that bound Luke's wrists. The fur was coarse and singed, the breath hot against Luke's skin. With a quick snap, Shadow bit through the rope. Luke gasped, tearing the tape from his mouth. "Good boy?" "Good boy," he whispered, the words cracking with disbelief. He didn't stop to think. He ripped at Ryan's bindings, then Cody's. The flames reached the dashboard, glass shattered. "Move!" Luke yelled. Ryan kicked the tailgate, metal shrieking under his boot. It burst open just as the fire reached the gas tank. They tumbled out into the snow. A blinding explosion lit up the night. The truck erupted, a fireball blooming in the storm, painting the forest in red and gold. The blast threw them forward, snow and ash raining down in a storm within a storm. For a moment, everything went silent, except for the ringing in their ears. Luke coughed, rolling onto his side. His leg burned, a piece of shrapnel lodged deep in his thigh. Ryan crawled toward him, dragging Cody by the arm. "You alive?" Ryan barked, voice raw. "Barely," Luke muttered, "but we're out." He looked toward the silhouette standing in the smoke. Shadow stood there, chest heaving, ears twitching. He didn't bark. He simply watched, as if waiting for the next order that would never come. The snow began to fall heavier, burying the tracks almost as soon as they were made. Luke tried to stand but stumbled, pain lancing through his leg. Ryan caught him under the arm. Cody followed close behind, still shaking. "Where the hell did that dog come from?" Cody asked, his voice thin with awe. Luke didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Shadow, who had turned his head toward the dark line of trees. The dog's ears perked, muscles tightening. He could hear something beyond the wind, a faint metallic sound, rhythmic and far away. A bell? Shadow started walking, slow at first, then faster, pausing every few steps to make sure they followed. Luke limped after him, supported by Ryan. "We can't stay here," Luke said. "If whoever did this comes back, we're done." The forest swallowed their words. They moved through the trees, snow crunching under their boots. The only light came from the distant glow of the fire dying behind them and the faint reflection of moonlight on ice. Their breaths came out in white bursts that vanished instantly. After what felt like hours, Luke spotted it, a small, flickering light ahead, swaying gently like a heartbeat. A lantern. As they drew closer, shapes began to form through the snowfall. A cabin, old, wooden, half buried under snow, its roof bowed but still standing. And there, near the porch, a smaller, warmer light, an oil lamp held by a figure. A woman. Sarah Miller had lived on the edge of the forest for nearly 4 years, alone with her daughter after her husband's death in a wildfire. She was 35, tall and slender, her long brown hair tied loosely at the back, her eyes a shade between gray and blue. Clear, calm, but always distant, as if fixed on something far beyond the present. The loss had changed her. She had learned to live quietly, her world reduced to the rhythm of seasons, the crackle of firewood, and her daughter's laughter echoing through the trees. She carried warmth in her hands, but sorrow in her eyes. Beside her stood Lily, 8 years old, her chestnut hair tangled from the wind, cheeks red from the cold, wrapped in a torn bright red winter coat and a wool scarf that had once been white. She was a curious, kind child, the sort who spoke to animals before she spoke to strangers. Her small hand gripped her mother's coat as she squinted into the storm. "Mom," Lily whispered, her voice trembling, "I think I saw someone fall in the snow." Sarah turned her gaze toward the darkness. The wind howled louder, and in that sound, for just a heartbeat, she thought she heard a faint bark carried through the storm. The bell from the lantern jingled softly in her hand as she stepped forward into the snow, light spilling into the night like a promise. And somewhere beyond the trees, Shadow lifted his head, ears tilting toward the sound, his breath steaming against the cold. The storm roared, the snow thickened, and fate began to pull its invisible threads together, toward the cabin, toward the woman and the child, and toward the three men stumbling through the cold, not yet knowing that salvation was already waiting for them in the heart of the storm. The storm had not eased by dawn. It was the kind of cold that bit through bone and whispered into breath, the kind that made even sound feel heavy. The small cabin by the frozen lake stood like a relic from another world, its chimney coughing faint smoke, its walls creaking with the rhythm of the wind. Inside, the air smelled of pine wood, tea, and the faint metallic scent of blood. Sarah Miller moved like someone who had been born knowing how to survive winters like this. Her long brown hair was tied back with a strip of cloth, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. She was 35, slender but sturdy, her face pale and angular in the glow of the firelight. She had been a nurse once, back when life still had hospitals, alarms, and schedules. But that was before her husband Daniel, a firefighter, died in an explosion 3 years ago, trying to save strangers from a gas station fire. Since then, Sarah had retreated to the woods with her daughter, trading city noise for silence and survival. People said grief had hardened her, but the truth was more delicate. She had simply learned that some things can only heal in quiet. She pressed a damp cloth against Luke Donovan's leg, cleaning the shrapnel wound. Luke lay on an old couch covered in patchwork blankets, his uniform torn and stained with soot. His jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Pain, for him, was just another order to obey. "You were lucky," Sarah murmured, her voice soft but edged with discipline. "If that piece had gone deeper, you'd have bled out in minutes." Luke exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold air. "We've had better nights," he said dryly. Across the room, Ryan Hale crouched beside the fireplace, coaxing flames to life with a handful of dry twigs. The ex-Marine's strong frame moved with mechanical precision. His dark eyes flicked toward Luke. "Lucky isn't what I'd call it. That dog saved our lives." Shadow lay near the door, his chest rising slowly, his coat damp with melted snow. He was 7 years old, but his eyes carried the wisdom of something older, an animal that had known loyalty, loss, and the strange faith humans never stop testing. His right paw was wrapped in a strip of cloth torn from Cody's undershirt, and every so often his ears twitched at the faintest noise outside. Cody Lane sat cross-legged near the stove, shivering despite the blanket around his shoulders. His blond hair stuck up in every direction, and his hands trembled as he stirred a pot of ginger tea. "It's boiling," he whispered to himself, more than to anyone else. He was young, idealistic still, though the night had stolen a layer of his innocence. Sarah's daughter Lily peeked from behind her mother's coat, clutching a worn, stuffed fox. She had chestnut hair tangled from sleep and a cautious curiosity in her eyes, the same look her mother had the night she decided not to go back to town. "Can he stay inside?" Lily asked, glancing at the dog. Sarah smiled faintly. "He's earned it." Ryan looked up from the fire. "He's more trained than most of us, probably a retired K-9. See the way he checks the door? That's muscle memory." Sarah glanced toward Shadow, her nurse's instinct noticing the rhythm of his breath. "He's been through something," she said quietly. "You all have." Hours passed. The storm howled, the fire cracked, and for a while there was peace. Ryan brewed another pot of tea, the sharp smell of ginger and smoke filling the room. Cody dozed off, his head resting on his arm. Sarah bandaged Luke's leg with gauze from an old first aid kit, her hands steady despite the tremor of exhaustion. When night fell again, the cabin seemed to shrink, the wind clawing harder at the shutters. Outside, the forest moaned, a sound of branches cracking under ice and something else, something not quite natural. Shadow lifted his head and growled low. His tail stiffened, ears pricking toward the window. Luke stirred from half-sleep. "What is it?" Sarah shook her head, uneasy. "I've heard that sound before, metallic, sharp, like machinery." She turned toward the window, her reflection faint in the glass. "2 nights ago I smelled gasoline near the ridge. Thought it was hunters or some idiot with a snowmobile." Ryan reached for his flashlight, checking the window latch. "Not the kind of weather for hunters." The fire snapped. The wind shrieked. And then all fell silent again, the kind of silence that doesn't belong to nature. Later that night, Luke woke to the soft sound of paper rustling. He pushed himself up, grimacing at the pain in his leg. The room was dim, except for the dying embers. Sarah had fallen asleep on a chair near the hearth, her head resting against the wall, her face peaceful for once. The lamplight brushed over her features, the tired lines near her eyes, the freckles on her cheek, the faint burn mark on her wrist. He noticed the photo frame beside her, a man in a firefighter's uniform smiling proudly beside a younger Sarah. The frame was cracked at one corner. Beneath it lay a small, weathered notebook. Luke leaned closer. On the cover, written in fading ink, were 4 words. "Don't give up on people." He didn't touch it, but he stared at those words for a long time, the way a man does when something hits a buried place in his soul. Then Shadow's ears twitched. His head rose sharply, eyes locked on the window. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Luke followed his gaze. Outside, through the swirl of snow, a faint red light pulsed in the dark. "Ryan!" Luke hissed. Ryan was already awake, instincts snapping to life. He grabbed his coat, moved to the door. Sarah stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. "What's going on?" Luke gestured toward the window. The red light blinked again, steady, mechanical. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't a vehicle. It was a drone. Ryan cursed under his breath. "Someone's scanning us." Sarah's face drained of color. She pulled Lily close, pressing the child's head to her chest. "If they're looking for you," Luke shook his head. "No, if they wanted us dead, they'd have finished it back at the truck. This is surveillance." Shadow barked suddenly, sharp and furious, his body coiling like a spring. The drone hovered closer, its small rotors whining through the storm. The red light cut across the snow like a sniper's aim. "Get down!" Ryan shouted. He yanked the curtains shut. Luke grabbed his pistol, emptied but still loaded with purpose, and crouched near the door. Shadow leapt forward, barking again, his voice echoing through the night. Then, without warning, the red light flickered, blinked twice, and went dark. The drone dropped out of sight. The silence that followed was heavy, too sudden to be natural. Luke opened the door a crack, snow blowing in. Nothing. Just the forest, still and watching. Ryan stepped outside, scanning the tree line with his flashlight. The beam caught only snow and branches. "Could have been automated," he muttered. "Or remote-controlled. Either way, someone knows we're here." Sarah held Lily tighter. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "Mom? Who are they?" Sarah brushed the child's hair from her face, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No one we can't handle." She looked toward Luke, who still stood at the door, the wind pulling at his torn sleeve. "Right?" Luke's expression softened. "Right," he said quietly, though his tone was anything but certain. Outside, Shadow sat in the snow, ears high, eyes scanning the darkness where the drone had fallen. His breath came in slow clouds. He didn't move until Luke whispered, "Good boy. Come on." As Luke closed the door, the wind howled once more, carrying a sound too faint to be clear, like footsteps retreating into the storm. And somewhere out there, hidden beyond the ridge, a pair of human eyes watched the cabin through a broken lens, a gloved hand adjusting the signal on a transmitter that still blinked faintly red. The storm had passed, but the world had not thawed. Aspen Creek woke under a pale, brittle sun that gave no warmth, just light enough to show how deep the night's secrets had buried themselves. The lake lay frozen in a sheet of glass. The trees stood silent like sentinels, and the cabin seemed to shrink against the vast whiteness around it. Steam rose faintly from the chimney as Sarah brewed coffee over the small stove, her movements deliberate, the kind of calm that came from living too long with danger's quiet footsteps. Luke Donovan sat near the window, his leg propped on a stool, the bandages clean but his mind restless. The sleep he'd stolen had been shallow, filled with flashes of the burning truck and the silent drone's red eye hovering in the dark. Ryan Hale stood outside, the snow crunching under his boots as he made a slow circle around the cabin, scanning the ground with soldierly precision. Cody Lane was stacking logs by the door, his breath misting as he worked, his youth momentarily replaced by grim focus. Sarah's daughter Lily sat at the table, drawing small figures in the frost on the glass. Her hair caught the morning light in auburn strands, her face intent, her world still half magic despite the danger surrounding them. Shadow lay by her feet, eyes half closed but ears alert, muscles tensed even in stillness. Ryan's voice broke the silence. "Luke, you need to see this." Luke grunted, pushing himself upright with the help of a chair. He followed Ryan outside, the cold biting through his coat. Ryan pointed toward the back of the cabin where the snow was disturbed. Footprints circling, too deliberate to be random. "They weren't just watching," Ryan said. "They were planting something." Luke knelt, brushing snow aside with his gloved hand. Beneath the roots of a pine tree, half hidden under frozen soil, a small metallic object blinked faintly, its red light nearly invisible in daylight. A transmitter. "This isn't standard surveillance gear," Ryan muttered, taking a knife from his belt to pry it free. "It's military grade, encrypted frequency." Luke's jaw tightened. Not the kind criminals use, someone trained, someone with backing. When they brought it inside, Sarah's expression changed from fear to recognition. "I've heard something like that before," she said slowly. 3 nights ago, out by the ridge, a high-pitched buzz, like something electrical. I thought it was the wind." Luke turned the device over, the initials KX-3 Tactical Systems engraved on its underside. "Not wind," he said, "and not random. This thing's been tracking heat signatures, probably ours." He barely finished the sentence when Sarah froze. "Where's Lily?" The room went silent. The child's chair was empty, her coat missing from the hook. Shadow's leash hung loose on the door handle. Sarah's heart lurched, and her voice came out as a whisper that cracked in the middle. "She was just here." Luke's pulse jumped. He scanned the room, eyes sharp. "Ryan, check the tree line. Cody, follow the lakeside." He grabbed his pistol and limped to the door, but Shadow was already ahead, bounding into the snow, barking once before disappearing into the trees. Sarah followed, pulling her scarf tight against the wind. "She knows not to go far," she murmured, as if convincing herself. They spread out in a line, the snow creaking underfoot. Luke's mind raced through every nightmare a parent could imagine. The forest stretched endlessly, white and cold and still, save for the sound of their own breaths and the dog's distant bark. Then Shadow's voice changed, a sharp, frantic bark echoing from the west. Luke turned instantly, his limp forgotten. "This way!" They reached a small clearing where the snow thinned and revealed an old logging camp, its roof half collapsed, walls blackened by age. Smoke, or maybe steam, rose faintly from a gap in the floorboards. Cody reached it first, prying away rotten planks. Beneath them was a metal grate, half buried. Ryan crouched. Looks like an old supply tunnel, maybe Cold War era. He brushed off the snow, revealing a hatch sealed with a heavy lock. And it's been used recently. From below came a sound, faint, a muffled sob. Sarah's face went white. "Lily!" Ryan slammed his boot against the lock once, twice. It broke with a metallic snap. The hatch opened, releasing a breath of cold, stale air. A ladder led down into darkness. Luke went first despite his leg, gun drawn. The tunnel was narrow and smelled of rust and gasoline. Light filtered only from the opening above. His flashlight beam caught the glint of metal shelves, empty crates, and, on the far wall, photographs. Children, dozens of them. Faces smiling from school portraits, all pinned in uneven rows. Names scrawled beneath in black marker, some he recognized from missing person bulletins posted in nearby towns. In the corner of the small chamber, Lily huddled inside a steel cage, clutching Shadow's fur through the bars. The dog had stayed with her, pressing close, growling low whenever the air stirred. "Mommy!" Lily cried as Sarah dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms the moment the door broke open. Tears froze on their faces as they clung together. Ryan swept his flashlight across the floor. Maps, tattered, oil-stained, were scattered across a table. "Luke," he said, his voice tight, "you need to see this." Luke limped closer. The maps showed the forest's underground network, old service tunnels connecting to abandoned mines, stretching all the way toward the outskirts of Aspen Creek. On one map, a red circle marked a location near the industrial district. Next to it, a single letter had been carved deep into the paper. Kay Luke's throat went dry. "They're moving them through here," he muttered. "This isn't random. It's organized. This is trafficking." Ryan's jaw clenched. "And that K? It's not a coincidence." "Creighton," Luke finished. The name hung heavy in the air. Once the police commissioner of Helena County, Richard Creighton, had vanished after federal charges of corruption mysteriously disappeared. Rumors whispered he'd built his own network, mercenaries, ex-soldiers, smugglers, all operating beneath the radar. Now the evidence was frozen under their feet. They carried Lily out, the cold air hitting like knives. Sarah wrapped her coat around the girl, her hands trembling. Shadow trotted beside them, his limp more pronounced, but his head high, eyes scanning the trees as though expecting the forest to strike back. By the time they returned to the cabin, the daylight was fading. The transmitter still blinked faintly on the table. Luke took one last look at it before smashing it with the butt of his pistol. "No more eyes on us?" he said. Ryan paced near the window. "We can't stay. If Creighton's men are around, they'll come looking for that device, and for whoever found it." Sarah shook her head, her voice steady but low. "Lily can't travel tonight. She's exhausted, and your friend's leg won't make it another mile." Luke leaned against the counter, his hand resting on the bandage Sarah had wrapped hours earlier. "We'll move at dawn," he said, "but tonight we stay together." Later, when the fire burned low and Lily slept safely under a pile of quilts, Sarah sat beside Luke in the small kitchen. The air between them was quiet but full. Two people who had lost too much learning, slowly, that trust could still exist. She replaced the dressing on his wound, her fingers brushing his skin lightly. "You've lost someone," she said softly, not a question. Luke looked into the fire, the light flickering across his face. "My wife, 3 winters ago?" Sarah nodded. "I lost my husband around the same time." Her voice trembled for the first time that night. "Sometimes I think grief is the only thing that still feels real." Luke turned his head toward her. "Maybe. Or maybe what's left after it is. Her eyes lifted to his, and for a heartbeat, the storm outside didn't matter. "You're learning to trust again," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Maybe. Because of you." In the corner, Lily stirred in her sleep, clutching a sheet of paper. When Sarah unfolded it later, she found a child's drawing. 3 people and a dog, standing beneath falling snow. A small cabin behind them, with smoke rising gently into the sky. Sarah smiled. "She drew us." Luke looked at the picture for a long moment, the faintest warmth returning to his voice. "Then maybe this cabin isn't just a shelter," he said. "Maybe it's where things start again." Outside, the forest exhaled softly under the moonlight. But deep beneath the snow, tunnels waited, and the shadows of men like Creighton were already moving. By dawn, the blizzard had broken, leaving behind a stillness so heavy it felt unnatural. The trees stood motionless, draped in thick white, their branches sagging under the weight of ice. The cabin by the lake looked almost peaceful from the outside, but inside, tension hung in the air like smoke. Luke Donovan sat by the window, watching the forest breathe. His hand hovered near his pistol, though the real danger wasn't in sight yet. It was in the silence. Sarah moved quietly across the kitchen, her brown hair tied up loosely, her sleeves rolled to the elbows as she poured coffee into tin cups. The exhaustion of the past 24 hours hadn't dimmed her resolve. If anything, it had carved her sharper. She glanced toward Luke. "You haven't rested," she said softly. "Neither have you," Luke replied, his tone gentle but firm. On the couch, Lily slept under a thick quilt, her hand resting on Shadow's neck. The German shepherd's eyes were half open, his ears flicking occasionally toward the distant sound of wind or a snapping branch. His body bore scars, old and new, but his spirit was unbroken. He was the kind of creature who lived entirely for the act of protecting. Outside, Ryan Hale and Cody Lane stood near the tree line. Ryan's breath fogged in the air as he scanned the ridge with binoculars. "No movement," he muttered. Cody, standing beside him, looked younger than ever in the morning light, his blond hair tousled, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "You think they'll come back?" he asked quietly. Ryan lowered the binoculars. "If they planted that transmitter, they'll come to retrieve it. And if they know we found the tunnel—" He didn't finish the sentence. Both men turned toward the forest when a faint hum broke the morning calm. It started as a vibration in the air, a deep mechanical growl echoing through the trees. Luke was already on his feet before Ryan burst through the door. "Engines," Ryan said, breath visible in the cold. "Multiple vehicles, heavy ones." Sarah froze, cup halfway to her lips. "Who?" Luke's answer came in a single word. "Creighton." The name hung like frost between them. Moments later the sound grew louder. 3 black all-terrain vehicles cutting through the snow, tires grinding against ice. When they stopped, men poured out, armed and dressed in dark tactical gear. And from the lead vehicle stepped Richard Creighton himself. Creighton was in his late 50s, tall and broad, with silver hair slicked back from a face that looked carved from stone. His eyes were pale gray, cold, sharp, and utterly without remorse. Once the decorated police commissioner of Helena County, he had built a reputation as a hero before greed and power devoured him. When corruption charges surfaced, he vanished, taking with him the knowledge of how to manipulate the very system he once upheld. Now, standing in the snow with a pistol holstered at his side and a smirk on his lips, he looked like a ghost wearing the skin of authority. Ryan crouched by the window, whispering, "We're outnumbered." Luke's gaze didn't waver. "We hold them long enough for backup. Cody, take Lily and Sarah to the north exit. Ryan, cover them. I'll hold the line." Sarah stepped forward. "You can't—" He met her eyes. "I can, and you'll make sure they live." She hesitated, then nodded once. Her hands trembled as she woke Lily, whispering urgently, "Sweetheart, We need to go." The girl blinked sleepily but obeyed, clinging to her mother's hand. Shadow stood at the door, tail rigid, fur bristling along his spine. His eyes locked on the figures approaching through the snow. He emitted a low growl, a primal warning that vibrated through the wooden floor. Outside, Creighton's voice rang out across the clearing. "Sergeant Donovan!" The man's tone carried amusement, a predator savoring the reveal. "Didn't expect to find you breathing after all these years." Luke stepped into view at the doorway, gun steady. "You should have stayed buried, Creighton." Creighton laughed, a deep, cruel sound. 7 years ago, you thought you could expose me. You burned half your career chasing ghosts, and lost your wife in the process. Tell me, Luke, was it worth it? Something flickered in Luke's eyes, grief and fury meeting in silence. "You killed good people. You used the badge to sell lives. I don't regret a damn thing." Creighton's smile vanished. "Then you should have died in that explosion." He raised his gun. Before he could fire, a blur of movement erupted from the doorway. Shadow lunged, teeth sinking into Creighton's wrist. The gun flew from his hand, clattering into the snow. Creighton roared in pain, swinging his arm, but the dog refused to let go. "Now!" Luke shouted. Ryan hurled a makeshift smoke grenade, an emergency flare wrapped in snow and sealed with a canister of powdered magnesium. It ignited with a hiss, releasing a dense cloud that filled the clearing in seconds. Visibility vanished. Shadows moved like ghosts within the fog. Gunfire cracked through the smoke. Luke fired twice, hitting one of the mercenaries in the leg. Cody, clutching Lily's hand, led Sarah toward the forest's northern edge. Ryan followed behind, covering their retreat. The air reeked of gunpowder and burning metal. Creighton wrestled free, kicking Shadow aside, blood dripping from his arm. He stumbled toward the door, shouting to his men, "Find the kid! Find the files!" But through the smoke, Ryan's silhouette appeared, arm cocked back. He threw another flare, this one bursting at Creighton's feet in a blaze of blinding red. The criminal stumbled backward, disoriented. By the time the smoke cleared, the clearing was chaos. Creighton's men scattered into the trees, retreating toward their vehicles. Shadow stood in the snow, chest heaving, one ear bleeding. Luke limped forward, gun still raised, and kicked open a briefcase one of the mercenaries had dropped. Inside were neatly organized folders, lists, transport manifests, photographs. Each file bore the same logo burned into the corner, K Enterprises. Sarah approached slowly, her voice trembling. "What is that?" Luke's jaw tightened as he flipped through the pages. A ledger, roots, names. They weren't just moving children, they were exporting them across state lines. Ryan crouched beside him. "How many?" Luke held up one sheet. 18, missing from multiple states, the ones we saw on the wall. Sarah covered her mouth, tears welling. 18, she whispered. "They're still out there." Luke grabbed the radio clipped to his belt, static crackling before the line connected. "This is Sergeant Luke Donovan, Aspen Creek PD, badge 3419. We have confirmation of human trafficking operation linked to ex-Commissioner Richard Creighton. Request immediate state and federal assistance. Coordinates transmitting now." The response came through faint but clear. "Copy that, Sergeant. Air units inbound. ETA, 1 hour." For the first time in days, Luke allowed himself to exhale. An hour later, the roar of helicopter blades shattered the silence. Snow whipped through the clearing as 2 Colorado State tactical units descended, armed and ready. Officers moved swiftly, securing Creighton's remaining men and surrounding the vehicles. Creighton himself was dragged from the edge of the forest, wrists bound, his face a mask of defiance. At the far end of Aspen Creek's industrial district, a raid unfolded simultaneously. A warehouse marked with the same insignia, K Enterprises, was stormed by law enforcement. Inside, amid crates and oil drums, they found the children, 18 of them, weak and shivering, but alive. By evening, the cabin had been converted into a temporary field post. Luke sat on a cot in the small medical tent outside, his leg freshly stitched. Sarah sat beside him, her hands wrapped around his, her eyes red but steady. "I was afraid you wouldn't come back," she whispered. Luke smiled faintly, the kind of smile that only comes after surviving the impossible. "I promised I wouldn't leave again." Lily peeked in from the flap, holding a cup of cocoa. "Mom says heroes need to rest, too." Sarah laughed softly, brushing her daughter's hair. "She's right." At the foot of Luke's bed, Shadow lay curled, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His coat was singed, his paws bandaged, but he was calm, the quiet triumph of a soldier who'd fulfilled his purpose. Outside, snow began to fall again, softer this time. Aspen Creek glowed under the floodlights of the rescue operation, but inside the small tent, warmth bloomed, not from fire, but from the fragile hope that maybe, for the first time in years, justice had caught up with darkness. 2 weeks had passed since the siege that turned Aspen Creek from a forgotten mountain town into the center of a story the world would never forget. The snow was melting now, revealing roads and rooftops long buried beneath white silence. The air still carried the sharp bite of winter, but the sun shone bright, gold cutting through the cold like forgiveness. On the steps of the town hall, the people of Aspen Creek gathered in thick coats and scarves, their breath rising in clouds as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Banners fluttered gently in the breeze, and children's laughter echoed through the square. For a town that had lived in fear for too long, this morning felt like the first deep breath after a nightmare. Luke Donovan stood near the podium, dressed in a clean navy blue uniform that still fit awkwardly around the bandage on his leg. The lines around his eyes were softer now, less burdened by the weight of ghosts. The morning light reflected off the small silver badge pinned to his chest, a new one, reissued to mark not just his reinstatement, but his return to purpose. At his side stood Sarah Miller, her long brown hair catching sunlight as the wind played with the loose strands. She wore a simple gray wool coat belted at the waist, her posture graceful but strong. There was something different about her now, stillness, but no longer born of fear. It was the calm of someone who had finally stopped running. Beside her, Lily clutched her mother's gloved hand, her bright blue eyes wide with excitement, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She had on a new red coat, not the torn one she wore that night, but a gift from the townspeople, a symbol that her story had changed, and sitting proudly at their feet, tail curled and chest puffed, was Shadow. The old German shepherd's fur gleamed in the light, though a white bandage still wrapped his front leg. His eyes, those deep amber eyes, were alert and wise, taking in the crowd as if he understood every word being said. Around his neck hung a black leather collar, newly polished, with a small medal that caught the light. Guardian of Aspen Creek. The mayor, Eleanor Briggs, stepped forward. A woman in her 60s with short silver hair and a firm, warm voice, she was dressed in a deep green coat and heavy boots that made her look more like a rancher than an official. "Today," she began, "we gather not just to honor courage, but to celebrate faith. Faith in one another, faith in the light that never dies, even in our darkest hours." Her gaze drifted to Luke. "Sergeant Donovan, would you do us the honor?" Luke stepped forward slowly, his cane tapping against the wooden stage. He looked over the crowd, the shopkeepers, the farmers, the families who had come out despite the cold, and his voice carried clear and steady. "2 weeks ago," he began, "I thought I'd seen the worst this world could offer. I thought the storm had taken everything worth believing." His eyes flicked toward Sarah and Lily. "But I was wrong, because light doesn't disappear. It just hides until someone is brave enough to look for it again." He glanced down at Shadow, who wagged his tail once as if understanding the moment was his. "Today we're not just honoring a dog," Luke continued, his voice roughening with emotion. "We're honoring courage, loyalty, and the reminder that heroes don't always wear uniforms. They come on four paws, or in the form of a mother protecting her child, or a child who still believes in miracles." Applause broke out, echoing across the square. Lily beamed, clapping enthusiastically, while Sarah's eyes glistened with tears she didn't bother to hide. The mayor approached Shadow, bending slightly to clip a shining silver medal onto his collar. "For bravery beyond measure," she said softly. "For the courage that saved lives and reminded us what humanity means." Shadow lifted his head, proud but calm as the crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back, a local reporter shouted, "Smile, hero!" Luke knelt beside the dog, scratching behind his ear. "You've earned it, partner," he whispered. The ceremony continued with music and speeches, but for Luke, it all blurred into one quiet hum. His focus stayed on the small family beside him, the two people who had unknowingly stitched his broken world back together. When the final applause faded, Lily darted toward him, scooping a handful of snow and packing it tightly. "Hey, Sergeant!" she called, her grin mischievous. "Think fast." The snowball hit him squarely in the shoulder. "Hey!" Luke laughed, feigning shock. "That's assaulting an officer, you know?" Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. "Consider it justice for keeping her up past bedtime with all those stories." Before Luke could reply, Shadow bounded forward, barking joyfully, chasing after Lily as she ran across the square. The crowd laughed, some snapping photos, others simply watching the moment like a living symbol of everything the town had survived. That evening, long after the streets had emptied and the banners had been taken down, the cabin by the frozen lake glowed once again. Warm light spilled from its windows, melting into the dark forest beyond. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cocoa and pinewood. Luke was fixing the doorframe that had splintered during the siege, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the lean muscle of a man used to work. His movements were steady, deliberate, each strike of the hammer rhythmic, peaceful. Behind him, Sarah poured cocoa into 2 mugs, her hands steady, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been since the day they met. When she handed him a cup, their fingers brushed, and for a moment they both paused. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think this forest was a place to hide from the world. But now—" She glanced toward the window where Lily and Shadow played in the snow outside. "Now I think maybe it's where life starts again." Luke smiled, that rare, quiet smile that came from deep in the heart. "I think you're right, and I think I'm done running too." He reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. The gesture was simple, but it held everything neither of them had dared to say. Outside, Lily laughed as Shadow rolled onto his back in the snow, paws in the air, the metal around his neck glinting in the dying light. The camera of fate, if one could call it that, pulled back through the window, revealing the small cabin standing firm against the twilight. Snow fell in lazy spirals, dusting the roof, softening the world. The faint sound of laughter carried into the woods. And then came the narrator's voice, warm and low, like the fire crackling in the hearth. "Sometimes God doesn't send angels with wings. He sends hearts that know how to love. And in the forests of Aspen Creek, a mother, a child, and a loyal dog helped a broken man believe in miracles once more." The fire crackled, the snow fell. The world, at least for now, was at peace. In the quiet after every storm, there's a reminder that even in the coldest nights, God's light never truly leaves us. It waits patiently, shining through the kindness of strangers, the courage of the broken, and the loyalty of a faithful heart. What happened in Aspen Creek wasn't just a rescue. It was a miracle, a whisper from God, reminding us that His angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they walk beside us on four paws, or live within the hearts of those who choose love over fear. And maybe that's the lesson we all need today, that hope is never gone, only waiting for someone to believe again. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little light today. Comment below what this story meant to you and if you believe that God still works miracles in our everyday lives. Write Amen in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your loved ones, wherever you are watching from.